All righty. Good morning. It looks like we are live and ready to go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much and welcome to the Human Capital Insights and Speaker Series hosted by LinkVisum Consulting Group. I am so excited that you're here. We are delighted that you're here. This is the first of a number of series that will address all aspects of human capital. And at LinkVism, we are powered by our people. So it makes sense for us to start our series very specifically talking about things focused around people and around human capital. And any leader in any organization, we all know that it's all about our people. So we certainly want to do that. My name is Fatima Moody. I am CEO and co-founder of LinkVisum Consulting Group. And at LinkVisum Consulting Group, we do a lot of work in the area of human capital. So I actually would like to just tell you a little bit about that. So on the very next slide, just before I tell you about that, we'll go back for a moment to the previous one, and that's fine. You are in the right place today, and we're again happy that you're here. The title of today's session is The New Out of Office, Creating an Effective Hybrid Work Environment. And we're intentional with the word effective because we all know that in today's times, we're doing a lot of things in a hybrid way, but are we effective at that? And we're going to talk and address that very, very specific thing. And our session today will be from 10 to 11:30. We have a lineup of amazing speakers who have in-depth expertise in this particular topic. And what we want to make sure that you walk away with today is tangible tips and techniques in order to be and create an effective hybrid work environment. So on to the next slide, let me tell you a little bit more about LinkVisum before I introduce our very first, our keynote speaker. So at LinkVisum, we are what you call the classical management consulting firm. We do a lot of work in the federal government space in particular, and we are end to end from a human capital perspective. So all things human capital, from training and development, organizational assessments, human capital frameworks, succession planning, human capital, you name it. But we're not just human capital consultants. We're also in the area of technology, solutions, and services, data analytics, program and process improvement. These are things that we do. Project management, PMO offices, strategic planning, and one of our favorite sweet spots in the area of change management and strategic communications. So just a little bit about LinkVisum. And just now, I'd like to really get us started, though, with introducing our first, our keynote speaker for today. So please allow me to do that. Our keynote for today is Dr. Russell Robinson. Dr. Russell Robinson is the founder of Amplified Research and Consulting, Inc., which provides research, analysis, and consulting solutions regarding employee engagement, voice and silence, and talent management. Russell has spent over 20 years as a uh, civil servant within the U.S. federal government. And in his current role, he serves as senior advisor of training and engagement of an agency's component. Russell provides solutions to improve the workforce experience and help leaders inspire and influence those within their span of control. I was speaking with Russell a little earlier today, and as an advisor, he was doing just that earlier today, advising on employee engagement for this particular federal agency. In addition, Russell is an adjunct professor at American University, where he teaches graduate level leadership training. Dr. Russell received his Doctor of Education degree in Human Organizational Learning from George Washington University. He received his Master's in Public Administration from American University's Key program and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Dayton. At this moment, I'd like to proudly and in a very happy way introduce to you Dr. Russell Robinson. And what he's going to talk to us about as we're getting his slides up and ready, maximizing performance through engagement, connection, and organizational wellness. But before you get started, I actually have one more slide, and my folks just cued me. So thank you, folks, for doing that. I want to just talk about some of the logistics for today. So thank you. Thank you, folks. So for the logistics, We want you engaged. We're happy that you're here. Use the chat feature to share your comments. We also will have a Q&A feature. Please post your questions. We want to hear from you. The way in which this particular platform works, AirMe, you participants' cameras and microphones are disabled during the session. However, you can use the raise hand feature if you would like to unmute to share. And we want to hear from you, so please do that. We hope that you enjoyed the social lounge. Some of you have had an opportunity to, who came early, to be part of the social lounge and just network a little bit. But there will be opportunities for that also towards the latter part of today's session. So sit back, relax, enjoy, engage, because this is all about engagement. Dr. Russell Robinson, it's on to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Fatima. So before I get started, I want to shout out Fatima and her team at LinkVisum for putting on this event. I think the return to work and hybrid work and just the of the past 27 months means it's ripe to have these types of conversations. LinkVisum in the human capital space tends to have an eye not as much on as much on where we are today, but also where we need to go tomorrow. In the background working the slides is Beth. She's the DJ on the ones and twos. So I want to shout her out for the awesome job she's going to do today. Fatima gave you a little bit of my background. So, I mean, I wear a few different hats: federal government, training provider, training deliverer, adjunct professor, researcher. So I will speak to all of those and kind of how they line up. But I always say the most important job I have is Thursday night because that's grandpa night at my house, and I got my 2 grandkids over, and in that role, I'm a TikTok video dancer, I'm a chef, and the most important job is I moderate who gets to play on the PS5 and win. And actually, a lot of and what I found is when I don't do that job well, that impacts how they behave, how engaged they are, or behave in school the next day. So I like to weave all of this good stuff together. This is a great group that LinkVisum has put together. Donna Powell, Christine Lawrence. You also got the awesome Michelle Amate, and she and I have spoken on virtual stages before. So you got a good lineup. I'm going to try to set the bar high. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Right. So maybe it was about 6 or 7 months ago, I was talking to one of my friends. So I'm assuming that this is a heavy federal government crowd. So I'm going to try to monitor all of my government acronyms that all the government people know, but the private sector people don't. But I had a friend who was a senior executive at an agency, and she and I had talked throughout COVID because it was really critical for her to sustain the culture she was building when the transition went from in-person to virtual. And she was telling the story how someone on their team unexpectedly lost their child during COVID. It wasn't due to COVID, but lost their young child. And she and I were talking, and she was just explaining, like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, yeah, there's no course at OPM. I'm an adjunct at American. There's no course. If you've gone to school for undergrad, advanced, or doctorate degree, there's no course that teaches you how to deal with death in the staff. And she was like, not only that, I don't want to break this news to staff over Zoom. Like, it's so impersonal. I don't know what to do. And we chatted back and forth. And we have been working on values, like her really defining her values. And I said, you have to go off script and be you. And you don't have to be the boss. You have to be you. You have to be yourself. So when she broke the news to the staff, and they were devastated. And she said, like, I'm just going into a different space. She was going into a vulnerable space, and she broke down. Like, when she gave the staff the news, the staff broke down. And granted, the situation was dire, or like something, as a parent you never want to imagine. She found a way to share that news and have conversations in an authentic and pure way through this virtual format. And now that's an extreme thing, but if you look at where we are right now, there's so much about what we've dealt with the past 27 months in this virtual setting. And when you look at where we're going, and I think a lot of agencies and organizations have already finalized their plan, whether they're going to be fully, I like to say, think of a bell curve. On one tail of the bell curve, everybody's in the office. At the other tail, everybody's virtual, and the bell in the middle is some form of hybrid. But that form of hybrid has so many impacts when you look at it as a system. It has so many impacts on leadership. It has so many impacts on followers. It has so many impacts on engagement. What we found now, and we'll get into data later on, that talks about wellness and well-being and how all of that impacts engagement. So we're going to get into that. Next slide, please. Right. So if you look at the past 27 months, and I think a lot of the researchers and talking heads and agency leaders talk about the pandemic, but it's really so much more there. I can tell you, the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor hit me in a way. I mean, they especially Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, because those could have been my kids. Like they're the ages of my kids. And I know one day I came in logged into work, and I was like, man, I'm just gonna turn my camera off. Like, I'm just not here today. And then after about a meeting or two, it's like, I'm really not here today. I need to take leave. And I'm the engagement person. And I was not engaged. But when I talked to my Black friends, especially my Black male friends, like, we were all at this state of like exhaustion and despair. And we talked about how it impacted us in the work world. After the massage parlor shootings in Atlanta, at my federal job, we pulled our Asian employees and did a podcast where they could talk about their experiences with racism. And on one hand, they were sharing that one said, I'm in my mid 40s, Russ, nobody's ever asked me about my racial experiences. But she also talked about how all of this and the racism that Asians experience due to COVID and people's perceptions, how it really impacted how they work. And if you look at what else besides social justice, earlier this year, we had I had a friend who was a union rep who was from Eastern Europe, and we talked about how the war impacted him. Politics, how politics impacts where we are at work, and if you're a career civil servant, how that layer of political comes closer and closer to the role of civil. And then just some of the stuff from basic work from home, people not having barriers, people not knowing when to shut it off at night. All these factors impact wellness and performance. Well, impact wellness and engagement, which impact performance. Next slide, please. Right. So here's the deal. I talked about barriers. So one of the things we found when our workers went out on COVID, and we were ready for it. Like, we were doing pulse surveys. We knew going to a virtual world was actually going to improve engagement. Now, that being said, we thought the pandemic was going to last like 2 or 3 months. So then what we found was people weren't shutting down at night. They were working till 10 or 11 at night. And then we had to work with our supervisors to say, hey, look, you need to send that announcement like at 6 p.m. Like, this is the last email that goes out for the day. People were finding that having kids in the house, having their spouses, partners in the house impacted. My house, I got music going on all the time. I have the TV going on all the time. I can multitask. My wife needs complete silence. And literally in our house, we work the furthest point away from each other. And that helps us keep everything harmonious. For some, that's not as much the case. Some people, there's a lot of data coming out on work from home that's really missing the point. But when you talk to HR leaders, they'll tell you over the past 27 months, domestic abuse is up. Child abuse is up. I was talking to a leader in the government who was explaining that she had staff that had expressed suicidal and homicidal ideations. Like, that's a lot to deal with. That's a lot. And that's asking a lot from leaders when a lot of times they haven't been prepared to deal with this. The first bullet is an unhappiness report that Gallup put out. I believe today's Wednesday, so it put out Monday. I chose Gallup, but McKinsey, Deloitte, the Conference Board, there's some good research out there that's free. I mean, the one thing Gallup did say in one of their reports, I think it's the first one, their engagement scores have gone down for the first time in 10 years. So this thing is going on all across the board. Can I get the next slide, please? Right. So now I'm going to be Dr. Russ for one slide and give you the academic stuff. So I believe that I have talked to maybe 600 civil servants, maybe another 120 private sector employees about what engages them. And I probably read 700 articles. When you get through all of that, if the simple solution I tell people is, when you think about your best job, think about your best job, think about the worst job you've ever had. Odds are, when I've talked to people, when they feel they're most engaged, they feel valued, they feel empowered, they feel like they're operating in a safe space where they can be vulnerable, they can be creative. Failure is not a fatal thing. They feel confident in their ability to do their job. They're also available. And availability pre-COVID, I think there was not a lot of availability for people, lack of capacity. And that's just been exacerbated by COVID. And also the stress of what we've dealt with the past 27 months. Conversely, when you ask people to talk about their worst job experiences, they talk about not feeling valued, that they feel useless. They feel like they operate in a fearful environment that's not safe. And they often talk about being overwhelmed. As a training provider, I try to say everything we do will touch those top 4 adjectives at the top. And we're very mindful from a cultural standpoint of the bottom 4 adjectives at the bottom. Next slide, please. Right. So here's what we can do. And I'm going to wrap this thing up. So if you are a leader, here are the things you can do in this hybrid work world. First and foremost, you got to focus on yourself. If you do not take care of yourself, I got a friend who just got a acting SES position that should be announced. And the first thing I told her is, like, the first thing you have to do is submit your ritual or routine to maintain your physical and mental awareness. It's critical. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. Second thing is, you have to see the system. Like, a lot of looking at this from a change management standpoint, especially employee engagement, like a lot of the vendors and consultants make it a really cause effect thing. If you do one thing, engagement will improve. You really have to see this as a system, and how one thing causes a ripple effect throughout. Third thing, you have to really look at, like, talent management. And this is really from a training standpoint. And it's really from some of the stuff we do, or that I've done from a diversity and inclusion in perspective. And we're doing some killer stuff, but it was driven by, we're going to look at diversity and inclusion beyond unconscious bias training. And I think a lot of times, a lot of fixes are viewed solely through the prism of just training. Emotional intelligence. The most important thing is you have to be able to connect with your people. Harvard Business Review, the current edition that came out, talked about how, when hiring for CEOs, their ability to connect with people and cultivate relationships is the most critical thing. And at the end of the day, you have to be flexible and agile. I think I view it, I have a 9-word sentence: strategic, agile, emotionally intelligent leaders empower employees and customers. We hit that sentence in everything we do. I'm trying to bring it into talent management so that we're hiring people who embody that. Next slide, please. For employees, develop your wellness routine, create rituals, share your thoughts, focus on yourself, try new things, assess your culture. Truth is, over the past 27 months, a lot of people's purposes changed. Like, the Great Resignation is not that bad. People have used this time to reassess their purpose, and they're making decisions on that. So definitely be flexible. focus on yourself, figure out how you can make sure the work you do shines and can be heard. SHRM had a report that said 50% of that remote workers are 50% less likely to receive promotion. So you have to figure out with the supervisors how to make sure that you're heard. Next slide, please. All right, so this is me. Here's where you can reach me. This is I wear, like I said, I wear a lot of different hats. I see this from a lot of different angles. I think the biggest thing I would leave you with is to really understand the role that well-being and wellness has on everything regarding work, regarding home, and do what you can to in this hybrid work world to take care of yourself. So, Fatima, I can take some questions if you got some.
Thank you so much. Such valuable information that you just shared. I certainly have some questions. There's a few that's in the chat, and I encourage folks, please put your questions in the chat. So here's the first one, though, that was in the chat. Does the Gallup poll suggest working from home is negative? What are some of the positive aspects and stats?
Yeah, so the answer is yes and no. And here's the deal, Monet. When you look at it from a change management standpoint, there's especially in the federal space, a lot of workers are like, I want to work full-time remote. I want to work full-time remote. But when you drill down, there are workers who are like, I miss the social connection of the office. You know, I've had friends who retired because they were just like, the lack of connection of coming in 2 days a week really impacts me. Some negative aspects of working from home is the lack of barriers. And we're talking about the situation where pre-COVID, whenever I would talk to workers and employees, one of the constant themes is this lack of capacity. And people really don't have that capacity now. I think it's a little too early to see the impact of working from home, what that has on like promotion potential. I think from leaders, if you don't know how to connect, if you didn't know how to connect before 27 months ago and you weren't intentional about it, the impacts that would have on your worker may be different from somebody who knows how to connect. I mean, I've talked to leaders who didn't change how they check in on people during the past 27 months. I had some who did, and I had some who really personalized with each staff member. Do you need to hear from me every day? Do you need to hear from me once a week? So to answer your question, Gallup has it. Look at McKinsey. Deloitte has some awesome stuff. I'm missing somebody. The Conference Board, truth be told, Virgin Pulse has some good stuff. There is good data out there that talks about the positive and negative aspects, and it's not just limited to Gallup.
So, Russell, thank you for that. You mentioned the word intentional, and I know when you and I did a podcast, we were talking very specifically about this intentional leadership in this new virtual environment. So what, and we believe very much at LinkVisum, providing leaders with specific tools and techniques as far as how to be more intentional in the hybrid world. So what's something that you would say out of your toolkit that you would say for leaders to demonstrate being intentional?
Yeah. So the first thing, again, you got to be able to connect with people. So no matter what the solution is, the leader that says, I'm just going to develop this solution in a box without talking to people and stakeholders to see what they want, is bound for some form of failure. So you have to use that, and it gets to change management. And then when you find out how people want to work, how they want to communicate with, how you want to meet, then you have to, as a leader, say in this change. And as we talk about, Fatima, this is really change management. Yeah. You have to be intentional about it. So I had one friend who's a senior executive in the government where she set up a 9 a.m. Open Zoom called Spill the Tea. And that was her opportunity. Everybody on the staff knew about it. You could log on. You could come in and talk about what you want to talk about. Conversely, with this return to work, I have consulted people where I think in this decision, in this hybrid world, the actual physical office space is going to have to be some form of social lubricant. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
this intentionality of, hey, Fatima, we've got this project due in 3 weeks. Why doesn't the team come in on Friday? We'll all come Wednesday. Nobody wants to come in on Friday.
Yeah.
Wednesday, we'll come in, we'll set
Mm-hmm.
aside like 9 to 1 to work on the project. And then let's go get lunch. Also being intentional about people like, hey, pick your day. If you need to come in and print, cool. We're intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who did an office move, and the intentionality was, look, just come in, move your stuff, leave. If you got to bring your kids in, we meet you where you are. Bring your kids in. The last thing I'll say is meeting people where they are.
Yep.
These successful leaders and organizations that have met people where they are, whether it's, I don't know how to use this technology. I am feeling burnt out. I did a thing at the main gig on wellness and engagement. And I actually was like, look, you guys see me as Dr. Rusty engagement guy. Last fall, I was burnt out. Here's what this looked like to me. The fact that I said I'm going to be vulnerable about it and meet people where they are and say that I'm not the expert all the time. The one thing I would say, last thing, is when we get into some of the stuff about domestic abuse, suicide, some of the things people are really struggling with, leaders don't have to have the answer. And I think a lot of leaders get anxious because they feel like they have to have the answer. Sometimes if you don't have the answer, you can literally say, look, I don't, this is new. I don't really know what the answer is. Tell me what support from me looks like. What can I do to support you? So that all gets to the intentionality.
A couple of key things you said I want to highlight in regards to leaders don't have to have the answer. So very true. And what's interesting, because work and home has basically merged, leaders and everyone's dealing with more issues in the quote unquote workplace. So these are things that leaders aren't accustomed to addressing or dealing with. So that's a good point. Like, leaders, you don't have to have all the answers. And then this whole thing about being intentional. I know when you and I were talking about this before, with everything, let's use the federal government, for example, but it's actually happening in private sector as well, where it's like there's a set number of days, we're going to do once a month or once a pay period, this, that, and the other. And some of the feedback we've heard from some clients, and, is that, well, what am I doing while I'm in the office? Does it make sense? I just commuted for 2 hours. I had to deal with childcare, I had to do this and do that. And by the time I get there, I'm not even as effective as I was before.
Or you're on a Zoom with everybody else who didn't come in.
Exactly. So so to the point that you said, when you do come in, be intentional about it. Do the things that you necessarily could not do as effectively remote in this hybrid environment.
But what I would say, to piggyback on what you said, forget COVID. If you are a leader and you think your job is to always have the answer, that is a recipe for failure.
Problem. Right.
Leaders, it's about getting to the right question. And where it says intention, where we talked about intentionality, it means I talked about seeing the system. Like, you have to seek out multiple perspectives. So there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, okay, if everybody's going to come in on this Wednesday, what type of stuff would make coming into the office valuable? And that way you're pulling different perspectives in, you're getting buy-in. You may hear perspectives you may not have understood. You may hear challenges you may not have understood. Like when COVID started, I have grown kids, and my sons moved. One came home from college because of COVID, and the other one lived in Dallas. And we were like, why don't you come into the house? So our work from home was me and my wife, my adult kids. Everybody's got a laptop, TV, smart TV in every room, strong Wi-Fi. We're good. And that's my prism. And I got a friend who was like, I'm a single mother with a 7-year-old and 5-year-old twins, one laptop. I have to work 10 hours a day and I have to homeschool. But if I don't understand that perspective, and I think the challenges with leaders like supervisors and managers really have to fly at a lower level, because you got to connect with all of your staff. So intentionality takes a lot, but it also includes seeing the system and seeking out multiple perspectives.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to address a couple of these. I know we're going to, and then we're going to shift gears and then I'll introduce Christine. But I see a comment here regarding, I guess, Doris Walmart. One of the negative aspects we've seen with working from home is that a corporate threat to the culture, onboarding new associates, missing the nuances of body language and just the as the eavesdropping on important issues. So this whole area, I was having a conversation after someone about this, the succession, the informal development of folks. We're missing that aspect. We're missing aspects of the culture. Any advice that you would have for that? Any commentary on that?
Yeah. So one, this is actually something you can train on. So we've done training,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the virtual environment for leaders, the virtual environment for followers. One, Doris, seek out the expert. So I'll be honest with you. I have a friend. I mentioned this on the podcast with Fatima. I have a friend. She's a Howard University grad, to the Howard University people, and she works in Amsterdam for a pharmaceutical company. And she'll tell you, she has a virtual team like pre-COVID. She's like, I've got staff on 6 continents. Here's how she's led this and built this culture. So you got to figure out things like from an onboarding standpoint. This probably isn't a good example for federal government because you can't do it. But I'm thinking of the company's name right now. There's a company called Perceptics where in this virtual world, when you get hired, you get a box, and the box has got mugs and t-shirts and hoodies, and there's a message from the CEO. And when you fire up your laptop, there's a message from the CEO's executive assistant scheduling time for you and the CEO. So there are things you can do to sustain culture. And I think one of the things we haven't really focused on is people who have started new jobs in the work environment.
Yep.
Do you fly people around? Do you use your regional offices? My friend I mentioned who worked in Amsterdam, her culture builder with her staff. She's like, I got staff on 6 continents. We rotate the time of our meetings. So somebody will have to take a meeting at 2 a.m., including me, but somebody will have it at regular time. And that's how they level set. One of the things we've done, one of the blessings of COVID is our West Coast staff love it because one, they don't have to fly if they don't want to. They were tired of training starting 8 and 9 a.m. East Coast time, which is 5 and 6 a.m. West Coast time. So in this virtual world where everybody's learning together, we don't start, the earliest we start is 10. Most of the time we try to start at 11 or 2. So there are definite advantages. What I would say you have to do, again, you have to be intentional. There's tons of good data out there. Tons of good data.
Yes, I agree. Yep.
My friend Steve Cadigan wrote a book called Workquake, which is really good. Focusing on how you connect. And here's the thing, there's no one way to connect. It's like engagement. There's no one way to engage people. There are tons of ways you can do it, but also talk to your people. Also, if you're connecting one-on-one, you can say, hey, Fatima, I said something in the meeting, but your reaction, I kind of either I said something wrong or didn't register with you. And if you've created this trusting environment, well, she could be like, well, Russ, what you were talking about was you were talking about the deliverable that was 2 years ago. And I just didn't want to bring it up. So connecting and finding that ability to chat.
Yeah. Awesome. Someone's asking the name of the book and the author. We put that in the chat. So just to wrap up some key points that you said, as far as just being intentional. All right. We were supposed to do that before, but listen, you've got to do it now. You have to be intentional about how and when you're bringing folks together and how you're leading, being authentic. This whole idea around the culture, identifying different and new ways in order to do that. It takes work to be in this hybrid environment. And we need to recognize the fact, all of us collectively, that it is a new environment. And we do have to put time into how do we bring people together? I'll use this meeting, for example, as an example, right? How do you get this type of dialogue and engagement going so folks can engage in the conversation and things of that sort? That takes work within itself. One of the things that we do at LinkVisum, one of the things I do as CEO, I have the quote unquote virtual office hours, as you mentioned earlier. You do things such as that. So that's a recommendation for leaders. Just, open up your Teams, your Zoom, whatever software that you're using, and just say, I'm here. Anybody jump in, drop in if you have a question, a comment, and things of that sort. So continue to be intentional. We're going to continue this conversation. We're definitely going to bring Russ back to talk more in regards to this. But I want to now introduce our moderator for the panel and then our panelists. So our moderator for this panel is going to be Christine Lawrence. Christine Lawrence is a director at LinkVisum Consulting Group, and she brings more than 15 years of experience assisting organizations in all aspects of human capital and process improvement. That's design and implementation of strategic programs, including training, development, workforce planning, organizational design, process improvement, selection. We talked a little bit about succession planning, Christine. She does that as well. So all of those aspects of succession, human capital. So Christine, she holds a master's in industrial psychology from New York University, as well as a number of certifications, including her PMP. Christine, welcome and thank you. And I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Thanks for that warm welcome. And I'm really happy to be here today. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm pleased to be facilitating the panel discussion portion of this event. So we're going to add a couple additional very experienced key speakers to this discussion. We've already had great discussion. So I'd first like to introduce our panelists, Donna Powell and Michelle Amante. So Donna Powell currently serves as a senior advisor in the Management Directorate for the U.S. Department of the Treasury within the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. She leads multiple programs and projects, including organizational change management and personnel transition planning. So welcome, Donna. We're so pleased to have you here. Michelle Amante currently serves as the Vice President of Federal Workforce Programs for the Partnership for Public Service. In this role, she works with agencies to research and find solutions to challenging human capital issues, such as employee engagement, exactly what we're talking about today, workforce planning, and talent recruitment and development. So welcome both of you, Donna and Michelle, to this conversation. So to start off our panel discussion, we have several prepared questions for the panelists, and we'll also have time to address your questions a little bit later. So just as we've done at the beginning of this event in posting questions in the Q&A tab of the chat, please continue to do so, and we'll get to some of your questions in a little later. So, okay, let me pose the first question to Michelle, and then Donna can add to this discussion. Our first question has to do with defining this new hybrid work model. So what advice do you have for leaders who are establishing a hybrid work model? Are there certain hybrid models that seem to be working better than others? And are there any pitfalls to avoid?
That is a big question. I feel like we could spend the half an hour just talking about that question. So I'll give some high level thoughts, and then hopefully we can get more into the discussion on this. But I think where I would start is like, there's no silver bullet here for like success. So like, just because it worked for another organization, that their formula for hybrid work doesn't mean it's going to work for yours. So you really have to be thinking about your culture, the culture that you have, or the culture that you want. Because I think most of us would say our work culture's changed over COVID when you're thinking about hybrid. So that's where I would start. And then the other kind of high level piece of information or of advice is that you're going to have to be iterative and be vulnerable as leaders about like, hey, we have not figured this out. We're going to start with X approach, and we're going to learn from you, and we're going to listen, and we're going to continue to evolve and grow. There's a lot of aspects of hybrid work. There's meetings you have to think about. There's things like onboarding that came up in the chat. There's facilitating trainings, et cetera. And I think you approach all of those things a little differently. What's interesting, I will just say from the partnerships experience about meetings with hybrid is we've had the opposite of what everyone expected. So we were very like hyper intentional about like, we don't want people on Zoom or on Teams to feel left out from the people in the room. And it's actually been the opposite, where I think many of you have found like, there was a lot of equity created with Zoom, right? Everybody had their equal box during COVID, and there was no kind of overwhelming presence versus another, which you would experience in a room. And so as we started having hybrid meetings, people who were in the room weren't necessarily involved in the chat. They were missing out in the chat. They were, there was one little box with the 10 people around the table, but everybody on Zoom had their own little box. And so it was interesting how the power dynamic had shifted from it was actually better to be on Zoom than in the room. So in terms of meetings, like really thinking through, like, how are you going to handle that dynamic? And so we've shifted where a lot of our meetings, particularly for a management team, we just say, if we're not all going to be in the room, we're just going to all be on Zoom. So we're not going to do it hybrid so that people have equal access. So just be really intentional about that. Like, if you can't, you won't always have it that way, but how are you, for the people that are in the room, how are you going to give them access to the chat? Or how are you going to make sure that they can fully participate in the meeting? In terms of just, we do a lot of facilitation with government agencies. And so the thing that we've been doing with hybrid training is we actually have a separate facilitator, one that will do work just with breakouts on Zoom or on Teams. And then we have a facilitator working kind of in the room with people. We found that, like, actually staffing hybrid or staffing virtual trainings it's more staff intensive than being in the room, just because you have to be very intentional about making sure people are engaged. And then the last thing I would say is, in terms of making sure people have equal access to leadership, making sure that, they don't miss out on those water cooler moments, which is something we've all been really sensitive about during COVID, is just continue to be really intentional with setting up time with your direct reports who are remote, right? So if I have, obviously there's going to be a lot of agencies here who have a much larger staff. The partnership is relatively small. I have 20 people in my reporting chain. And so my direct reports I meet with every week, and everybody in my reporting chain I meet with at least every 4 to 6 weeks on a one-on-one. And I do that because I don't see them around the office anymore. And so I want to make sure that they have access to me. They know that they can come to me if they need to. It is a great way to get intel about what's going on around the office. So, find a way to connect with people one-on-one so you don't miss out on what you used to have in the office. But I'll stop there. I could keep going.
Well, and then to Michelle's point, I mean, everything she said is absolutely true. And I would just say with Zoom, and you're also able to, I would say, foster even healthier working relationships because everybody wants to be there. And it has allowed you to put faces with names with persons that aren't necessarily within your core working group. So I just see there's a lot of respect, again, a lot of healthy working relationships because people want to be there, because some people have been feeling disconnected. So they look forward to those opportunities where they can come together. And when we're talking about the meetings, just continuing to, make them purposeful and meaningful. And as Michelle mentioned, as the leader, make yourself available. So, have those standing, team meetings, but also that one-on-one time makes a lot of difference.
Thank you both. So some of the themes I've heard from, this making the hybrid work model work is, sort of being intentional, again, that we heard before. Also that flexibility of leaders to meet as a group and create an environment where everybody's sort of on the same playing field. So if it's everybody in person, everybody on Zoom, as well as that flexibility and creating a space to do one-on-one time with folks. So to sort of, keep in line with the in-person environment that we were able to do. I will say too, in terms of creating that hybrid work model, what we found too at LinkVisum, and, Russell mentioned it before, getting input from employees, I think is really critical. And so what we've done at LinkVisum is helping our clients to create surveys to get input from employees. What are they thinking about? What things do they need in place to develop, to come back in office, whether it's part-time or full-time, and really getting input from employees and having their voices heard in terms of creating that hybrid work model. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Great. So second question, and this one will go to Donna first, is about Zoom screen fatigue. So, being on camera in virtual meetings can become exhausting. As we know, over the past couple of years, many of us have been on many, many meetings on camera. How can we help prevent employees from feeling that Zoom fatigue in a virtual environment while still ensuring that we have productive and engaging meetings?
Well, one thing as a leader, be okay sometimes with having no video. So, you don't always have to see people to know that they're there, to know that they are making an impact. Also, again, going back to making your meetings meaningful and purposeful. Everything doesn't have to take an entire hour. Make sure that your meeting has an agenda and stick to the agenda. Another thing is make sure that you've determined whether or not is this really a meeting or could this be an email? Now, we'll never get away from meetings. We'll never get away from that. And I know as a leader, we want to see everyone's faces, we want to hear their voices, but everything doesn't require an hour-long meeting. Another thing to keep in mind is just, like I said, I made a note to myself, eliminate the unnecessary meetings and make sure you're focused, and whatever it is that you're delivering, try to think in advance of what the questions or concerns that the person may have so that you can address that up front. But just make sure that you really need this meeting before you have it. And be open to that feedback. Make yourself available even after hours. So that's really with the Zoom fatigue. Just, you might not need it, but another critical aspect to consider is no meeting days. Every time you have to take a meeting, it takes away from your time to complete your actual work. So what I have found that has worked for me, especially when I've had to meet with vendors, I will set one day a week, nothing but meetings with the vendors. Now, of course, if my director says, Don, I need to meet you in 10 minutes, I'll be there in 5. I can't get away from that. But again, no meeting days so that you can actually focus, so that you don't have to be interrupted throughout your day. But again, key things, is it really a meeting or is it an email? Meaningful, purposeful, and agenda driven.
I love all of those points. Highly supportive of everything Donna just said. A couple of things that we've tried at the partnership just to amplify your points is, so for every meeting invite that goes out, we say whether on camera, optional or expected, right? To give that so that our staff feel like, okay, my leader is telling me it's optional, so I don't have to feel that pressure. I have permission from the time I accept that meeting to be off camera. And because I'm a very extroverted person, so I don't mind being on camera all day, but I recognize that that is not how everybody that reports to me feels. And so I want them to be able to go for a walk and take the call as they go for a walk. It's equally effective. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to remember what it was like back in the day of just conference calls. But we used to do that all the time, right? We didn't used to have video. So we can do this. It is possible to do it via a conference call, especially if it's one-on-one. It is harder, I think, when you've got a group. It's really, it is beneficial to see the kind of facial expressions and reactions. But if it's a one-on-one, it's very easy to do it as a call. The other thing that we've done is, and I personally was falling into this trap too, where I would be sitting at my desk and you can't even go to the bathroom, right? It's meeting. So we tried to do now where all of our meetings are 25 minutes or 55 minutes long. So there is at least a 5-minute break in between, so that if you have to have a bio break, if you have to grab a cup of water, that little bit of time is already built in. So that is an expectation that we have at the partnership, that we have those 5-minute breaks in between. So those are just some tips to consider when you're doing a meeting, in addition to all the great things Donna said.
So I also see a question here, and it's asking, how would you suggest an individual in this position address their approach? My recommendation is set the tone from the beginning. I've been in meetings where, hey, the supervisor never has a video on, and that's okay. So another leader sent in their second in command, and she was the only one on camera. And so he said, why are you doing that when none of us are on camera? She said, well, when I'm with my supervisor, that's what's required. He said, well, you're with me now. So you just want people to, to relax. And the other question is, when off camera is optional, how do you ensure engagement? Well, I have found before the end of each meeting, just go around the virtual room and ask, does anyone have anything that they'd like to share with the group? That way, everyone can say that they had an opportunity to participate. But again, be okay with not being on camera, but you can still be engaged.
Absolutely. And I think, if and I don't know, Monet, if you're alluding to like, if we're concerned that people are multitasking and not really, because that certainly happens too, if you're off camera, just keep an eye on the situation. And if it appears that they're not engaging in meetings, like have a one-on-one, have the talk with them and say like, look, like I am okay if you're off camera, but I expect you to be fully present and engaged as if you were on camera.
Great points and great tips related to this Zoom screen fatigue. I mean, one of the key points I heard is, having those expectations out there, whether it's an on-camera versus an off-camera, and for leaders to provide that variety too. And you're right, it seems so long ago that we did do conference calls where nobody was on screen and we can still get things done without seeing people. I did really like the point about going around and giving an opportunity for everybody to speak, even if you're not on camera and seen, to make sure everybody's presence is known and heard. Wonderful tips about, this fatigue that we're all feeling with being on screen. I did also, in terms of scheduling meetings, it's nice to have a break in between, because that's really important to kind of, refocus and get ready for the next one. And with this back-to-back meeting, sometimes we get into that habit of, not having those breaks. And also the tip about a no meeting day, not to be on camera, in terms of providing that variety. So wonderful tips. Thank you for that. We'll move to the next question we have regarding organizational culture. So I know that was brought up too at the beginning with Dr. Russell Robinson as well. This, shift to virtual or hybrid work models can have an effect on your organizational culture. How do we build or rebuild that culture within our companies and work groups as we make these shifts towards our new normal? And we'll start with Donna on this one.
Well, first I would like to give a hand clap to all the CIOs and all the IT specialists, all the CISOs for helping us stay virtual and helping us, by delivering this technology so that we can continue to be in a collaborative environment, because without them, we'd be nothing. And, I think with the virtual and staying engaged, it's an opportunity for us to really look at what our goals are. Like, why are we here? So as a leader, take this opportunity to review that strategic plan, to look at those goals, to bring the team together and look at those goals together, develop, revise, or whatever you have to do with the operational goals, looking at those measures and metrics, the key performance indicators together, because every job is important. So really determining, okay, how are we going to meet this? What is it? What's the SWOT analysis? I know that's our favorite: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Making sure, again, that our goals are SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, retainable, as well as reachable and timely. So, with all of that being said, you as a leader, and I'm really echoing everything that's been said before, making yourself available. Letting people know what their purpose is within the organization and that what they do is important. There are no unimportant jobs. Some jobs may be more complex than others, but reminding people that what you do really matters to move this mission forward. And here it is in goal 4.1, or 4.2, and just also look at tools and opportunities to bring the team together. I know some may be virtual, some may be in the office and what have you, but look at opportunities for offsites. Instructor-led offsites really make a big difference, getting people away from the office to really talk about what's going on, some of the challenges, some of the successes, and how we can move to the next level. Another key piece is creating collaboration and not competition within the team. Don't chastise somebody because they're virtual, whereas some people have the opportunity or choose to come into the office. Still fostering collaboration and partnership within your group, as well as outside of your group. As I mentioned earlier, being in the virtual setting, you do get an opportunity to put faces with names and people outside of your group. So again, I just think there really is a positive aspect to to where we are with our work environment. But again, encourage creativity and innovativeness, because I think in this environment, you're going to see a lot more of that. Again, ending with, and I'm repeating myself, but make yourself available. But also as a leader, be open to constructive criticism and feedback as well. You know how we have those end of year or mid-year performance reviews and such. That's normally the supervisor talking to the employee, going over their performance plans. But also, once you're done with that, put that aside and say, and I think it was mentioned earlier, how can I help you be successful? So, and also the one-on-ones. I don't know about you all, but I know I've heard it time and time again from other people, where my supervisor doesn't talk to me, or they don't really care about what I do. They don't know how what I do is of value to the organization. Don't let that happen, because that kind of is a failure. Make sure everybody knows that what they do is of value to the organization, and look at other ways to help them reach that next level within the organization. But you can't do that if you're not talking. And to talk, you also have to be willing to listen. Fearless communication is so important, so that when people walk away, they have no questions about what is expected of them and what you're going to do to support them in reaching these goals.
Yeah, I think when I think about culture, and I alluded to this earlier, it'd be hard to find an organization whose culture has not changed in the last 2 years. I think some of the rub that I've been seeing in federal agencies is that the leaders aren't recognizing that, and they just want to go back to the way that things were. Like, all problems will be solved if we can just go back to the office, right? We just need to be together and everything will just work its way out. Without recognizing that your culture has changed, and you need to think about that, assess it, and really intentionally decide what is the culture that you want for your organization. What do you want to aspire to be? And then be very intentional about it. So best places to work in the federal government rankings are going to be coming out July 13th, right? And so it's an opportunity for agencies to reassess what their employee engagement scores are currently and what to do about it. And so make this part of your action planning, right? Like, what culture do you want? And what are we going to do to get there? So following up on some of Donna's great points, like, what are we going to do about like one-on-one interaction with leadership? How are we going to address that? What are we going to do to create community, right? That's really challenging right now. What are ways that we can incentivize people to come back into the office? So we're doing, Russell mentioned this too. We're at the partnership. We're doing like free lunches on certain days of the week. Like, people always like free foods, right? So like, come into the office, we'll give you free lunch. Like, what can you do to help kind of create that community again? But if you don't get ahead of what you want your culture to be and making sure you address the steps to get to that, it'll get kind of out of control. You will have a culture, whether you're intentional about it or not. There is a workplace culture for where you work. So instead, what do you want it to be? Like, now that things have changed, where do you want to go? How do you, I hope you want your people to bring their, authentic selves to work every day and feel included. And like, how are you going to get there? And so my biggest advice is just to be very, very thoughtful about the action steps that you need to take to make sure it happens.
Wow. Yep. A lot of great points and tips in terms of culture, and knowing that culture is affected by this new normal that we've had, virtual and hybrid. Some of the things that I've heard was really making sure individuals know that they're important. Their role is tied to the strategic objectives of the organization. Having some offsites, some things, for interaction outside of the workplace and the work itself. I just mentioned at LinkVisum, we're currently working with a client where we're helping them create team building training in this virtual environment. So what types of things can they do, to create that virtual water cooler, to make sure there's cohesive teams and there's opportunities for people to engage with each other and keep up with that organizational culture, especially if your organization is very team-based and collaborative. How do you make sure that that's sustained over this when everybody's, if they're in a virtual world looking at a screen instead of having those conversations, sort of side conversations? So great tips. And in terms of culture and things to think about, I'll move to, we have another question planned, and then we'll also take a look at the Q&A. But at this time, I'd like to ask and invite Dr. Russell Robinson to join us back on stage, as well as Fatima Moody, as we talk about these last questions and get some information from our attendees here in the Q&A. Welcome back.
Great, thank you. Lively conversation. I'm glad to jump into this without a doubt. You want to go with your next question first?
Absolutely. So the next question has to do with overall changes in conducting business over this last 2 years. So again, very broad question. A lot of things were mentioned, but just to, focus on this and dive a little deeper into it. What have you observed over the last 2.5 years in the workplace that has permanently changed how we conduct business and engage the workforce? And I'd like to start with Michelle, and then we can move to Russell in terms of responding to that question.
Thank you. I'm seeing some shout outs to Syracuse in the chat. I'm just going to say, go Orange. I'm also a Syracuse alum, so that's very exciting. Yes. So in terms of how things have changed, I think we're not going back, right? So I've seen some agencies try to go back, but your workforce is not going back, right? They appreciate the flexibility. They want to take the goodness that came out of the pandemic and keep it. So I think, I am very interested as someone who's always, watching the federal workforce, and we do a lot of research at the partnership. I expect over the next year to see some massive shifts in terms of people moving from one agency to another where there are more workplace flexibility. So I think that's going to be something fascinating to watch. So, in terms of changes, people are going to want the flexibility. People are going to want options to work from home. In terms of workforce composition, a trend that we were already watching pre-pandemic was the increase in freelancers and independent contractors. So in 2019, I believe it was about 35% of the workforce was a contractor or freelancer. Over half of Gen Y, or Gen Z, I'm sorry. And so I expect that to continue. People got a taste of that during the pandemic. We think about the gig economy, being able to kind of manage your own employment. And so I think that's going to continue, and especially for the federal government. How are we going to manage that, right? That is not a system that really jives with the civil service system. So, what does that mean for the future of federal employment? So these are all things that we're watching at the partnership, and we're curious to see what kind of plays out in the federal workforce. But, I think in terms of, as you all are thinking about your own teams, recognize that people's mindsets have shifted, right? And they are expecting more from their employers, and they have options. Right? They're no longer, particularly when you think about Gen Z, there's not the loyalty to an employer that maybe someone from my generation had. So you have to be thinking about what is the value proposition that you're providing to your employees all the time? How do you keep them engaged and excited about coming to work every day?
Man, okay. So now I'm going to come up with everything that Michelle didn't just say. Yeah, so I think especially to the CHICOs and the Chief Human Resource Officers, I think you really have to rethink talent management. So talent management actually starts with the candidate experience. So what's the experience of somebody that we may not actually hire? And in the DC area, the impact of Amazon moving in, they've pulled from a lot of the big boys, the Deloittes, the Boozes. They're going to be coming for federal. They will be appealing to federal people, especially if you're a federal person doing supply chain who wouldn't want to work at Amazon. I think to piggyback on what Michelle said, we have to find a way to understand, especially with the Gen Zs and millennials, that on the back end of the talent management, how do we create these boomerang opportunities where we leave the light on for employees if they want to come back. So the brand of the organization really has to change. The focus toward talent management or the repurposing of talent management really just beyond training only, to where I said earlier, you have to see things as a system. There's a group, I believe, called the Organization for Network Analysis. And they put out a report that basically says internal talent management is the thing in the private sector. So where Michelle talked about the gig economy and younger workers wanting to do this independent contract, actually the wave that's happening in private sector, which will probably flow to the public sector, is job descriptions are going to go away. I'm going to be hired for a base, for a set of skills within my federal agency. And if everybody on screen now, so my thing is how to build a voice culture. Well, part of, and we work for Fatima, because at the end of the day, we all work for Fatima. But if Christine, Donna, and I are here and they're all leaders, and my job is a voice culture, well, maybe 6 months I'll be helping Donna with the change, and then for the next 6 months I'll migrate to Michelle, and then to Christine. So it really takes a level of intentionality to understand the change. The last thing I'll say is the key word in looking at the turnover data and the Great Resignation data. The key word is scarcity right now. Like, employees are, I think at the beginning of COVID, there was a thought of people who are eligible to retire, the 30-year people. Those are the ones who are going to leave on the back end of COVID. I got a friend who's SES at an intelligence community agency who hits 20 years this summer. And he's like, I'm not going back to that commute. I'm actually leaving the government. That's not where my impact is. And what you're finding is the savvy Chicos and chief human resource officers have prepared for that. An example, and then I'll wrap up. I told Fatima I'm on vacation in 48 hours. So I'm hoping by this time Saturday night, I'm going to be in Tuscany. The airlines and the airports were so prepared, so ill prepared for the back end of COVID, that they laid employees off without focusing on what's the boomerang plan, what's our brand, what's the value proposition to bring them back, where now you have demand where people want to fly, but you don't have the pilots or the ground crew or the security people to meet that. And I'm looking at, like, who's the chief human resource officer for these airlines and these airports? How did they miss it? So it takes intentionality, change, a whole different view of talent management.
You know, I do think with this, in the pandemic and where we are in our environment, a lot of employees are looking for purpose in their work. So you will see a lot of people leaving. They may be doing something totally different, but this time has allowed them to reflect on what matters most to them. And it isn't always money. Yes, people work primarily because they have to, not because they want to. So you are going to see some flight, but it could be healthy for an organization as well. And, and when we talk about those leaders who are, just shifting gears a little bit, but there is a question, and the question is, how do we manage senior leaders who have an issue with work from home while also dealing with staff who do not want to return to the office, particularly diverse staff who feel that work from home is more of a safe space? So again, what is your purpose? What were you created to do here on this earth, and what organization is going to help you reach that goal? That is something that you have to deal with internally. Now, if we're talking about employers and leaders who don't embrace, the telework and the remote status, they are going to have to deal with that flight. So that's why it's going to be very critical that they have those succession plans in place. Something simple as processes and procedures written down, because you are going to see a migration of people. But ultimately, you have to determine what is going to work best for you.
But I think that's somewhat ironic, because there's been no data, no report in the federal government that says over the past 27 months that civil servants have not delivered, have not produced, I can't find an employee they're not accountable. So you had these leaders, for what Donna's example was, who were like, we're focused solely on results. And then COVID happens and the results happen. And now they pivot to, well, it's not really about results. It's about time and attendance. That's not going to work. That's a talent management issue.
This is
Thank
such
you.
great. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to say, Fatima, sorry to interrupt that. I'd like to, great discussion. I'd like to turn to some of the questions in the chat. And thank you, Donna, actually, for referencing a couple of those questions already. I'd like to reference this question regarding Generation Z employees. So this is something we haven't discussed. So how should employers engage Gen Z employees as they're fairly new to the workforce? How should expectations be managed? As majority of this generation started their careers using or during a pandemic and our virtual environment. So these are folks who started virtual and now being considered, coming into the office potentially in hybrid or full-time in office. So I'll turn to the panel. Thoughts on this?
I'm happy to start because this is an issue that the Partnership for Public Services, this is the reason the partnership was founded, frankly, 20 years ago, was how did they get young people into government? We're still sitting at, less than 7% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30. So we have been in this crisis point for more than 2 decades. And with this new generation is an opportunity that we did not have before. So, and it goes right to Donna's point with the last question with purpose. So when we look at what Gen Z wants, more than anything, they want to find meaning in their jobs. They want to find meaning. They're very values driven. They are not anti-government, which for federal agencies, that's a big bonus. That's great. So the question then becomes how does the government capitalize on this? And this is where I worry as someone who, is trying to get young people into government, is that you cannot keep doing talent management the same old way, right? They're not going to read a really long job description and go to USA Jobs and wait 3 months to get an email back. And that's just not going to work. And so if you continue to do it the same old way, we will continue to miss out on this opportunity, and they will go to nonprofits. They will go to private sector companies that have kind of a mission-driven organization. So this is I feel this urgency that this is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to get this generation excited about public service, and we don't want to miss out on it.
Something that was mentioned earlier, I think it was by you, Christine, also surveys as well. I think surveys, they're going to be good when we're talking about the climate, because FEVs may not capture everything, and giving people an opportunity to really share, what their thoughts are. And when we talk about talent management, it's also important. And part of that is recruiting, not doing everything the conventional way. Like Michelle mentioned, everyone's not going to go onto USA Jobs. Yes, set up the college fairs across the country. That's going to be a great way of getting great talent. Set up internships, paid internships. I've seen there's an increase in paid internships. So these are some tools that may not be traditional, yet they're still compliant, within federal regulations, so that you can capture some great talent and then incentivize people, not just your annual performance review time, but for awards for creative ideas. People want to know that what they do makes a difference, that it really is pushing the envelope, but at the same time is moving the mission forward. They need those attaboys, not just the standard, employee of the month. No, they need to know that I made a difference and here is why. So they want the recognition. They deserve the recognition. Utilize your recruitment companies. let them be some eyes and ears to get talent, from across the country, because the competition is real. You have your Amazons, you have your other major corporations that are actively seeking top talent. And they are also at the colleges. They're also leveraging recruitment companies to get people on board, because there are some benefits that, the government offers that private industries do not, and vice versa.
Excellent points. Thank you, Michelle and Donna. I'd like to turn to a couple more questions, get a couple more questions in. One from Joy Hunt, and this is from the perspective of the employees and promotion. So she mentions the statistics you shared on negative impact on promotion from work from home workers caught my attention. What are some steps you recommend to mitigate potential harm and preserve promotion pathways for employees?
I will take that.
Thank you.
So I think the first thing is to dig deeper beyond if I'm a manager and I have a staff, I would present that staff with this report or data, and then have a conversation and see if you can find out what is going on. Trying to figure out ways to create a space of safety. I think what we learned the past 27 months is, at the end of the day, it really comes down to Maslow. Do you feel safe where you work? And then the value of, do you have ways to grow or thrive or meet your purpose within an organization? I think you have to have a conversation with your staff to figure out exactly where they are compared to that survey data. And hopefully there's a trust level that's there. And then look at what ways you have for people to advance throughout the organization. And maybe there may be needs that your organization doesn't offer. And maybe there may be an opportunity where you need to become more flexible. And then also, as a manager, I'm open with my staff that I view every job somebody has is just the opportunity to set them up for their next job. So turnover is fine with me. It's okay with me. How do you create a culture where I mentioned those boomerang employees, where they can leave, but they can also come back?
Every leader should be creating leaders and creating opportunities for people to lead. If you are in charge and you leave tomorrow and your organization fails, you as a leader fail. So that's where, again, having those discussions with employees, not just about performance, but about where they want to go within their career, and how you, as their leader, can help them get there. Not negating what they're doing today, because all of it is relative. It's building upon what it is that you're doing today, but you should be creating leaders.
But I also think, wait, one more thing. I also think at a higher level, and I've been in government 21 years, 4 agencies. I can tell you, Donna, there are leaders who won't get it. There are leaders who don't care. There are leaders who will not do that. I think at a larger level, at a higher level, from a talent management standpoint, you have to create an organization and a culture where you have leaders that can do exactly what you just said. And I've talked to 500 feds. I actually have a one-on an unofficial exit interview with someone leaving tomorrow. And I think the data is going to say that her leader did not or does not have the skill set to do what you just described. And I think again, that goes back to safety. And I think that's a challenge that the federal government is going to have to face, especially right now.
Having those challenging conversations, they have to take place. Now, as an individual, like what you said, some agencies do not have those persons in those positions. You, as the employee, have to take matters into your own hands, meaning don't wait for somebody else to push you. You push yourself. Look at opportunities to take additional classes, to obtain certifications. Really look at the type of organization that you like to work for. FEVS is a really good tool to determine whether or not this is a healthy work environment. Is this someplace where I like to be? So you may get the interview, and I always say, even in an interview, just as much as they are interviewing you, you are interviewing them. Always look for any type of pitfalls. I even have, I've seen in interviews where the interviewer is on the phone. That lets me know right there, you're not engaged. I can't work for you. Because if you are not a person who really cares about your people, it would say mission first, people always, then you really need to look at whether or not you need to hold that seat. And if this is the type of person in which you report to, then you need to be seeking something else. I'm not saying, just run all the time, because an excellent employee is going to be excellent no matter where they are, but they typically lead because of the leadership. And again, if those promotional opportunities are not where you are currently, use that as the fuel you need to be excellent someplace else. It will all eventually work out for your good, because you can't grow without challenges. And sometimes you're placed under leadership, not so much for them, but to give you an example of how not to be when you eventually move into a place of leadership.
One other thing I would say, just to get tactical, we talked about the one-on-one, how critical those one-on-one meetings are with your direct reports and even the level below you, so that you can start to map out like what their career path will look at an agency and how you can advocate for them and help them get there. But also, I think something else leaders can do is help your employees build relationships with other senior leaders in the organization, right? Like if you're being a good leader, your goal is not to own that person. It's to provide them with opportunities so they can flourish and thrive. And meeting people across the organization is so much harder now that we're remote, since everything has to be a very intentional meeting. So I think giving them opportunities either to work on specific projects or details with other senior leaders, or help them facilitate those relationships so that they can have additional promotion opportunities in your organization.
Just to wrap up this discussion, this is a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And I know, as mentioned earlier, we could talk a long time about all these issues. I do want to be respectful of our time here. We're getting to the end of our forum, and wonderful questions in the chat. We're going to capture all these, so these aren't lost. I just want to thank everybody for putting questions in the chat. I want especially to thank the panel speakers here for, during this session that we just went through, and really great dialogue that's happened. This is an example of being in the virtual space with the interaction and engagement from everybody here who's attending. So I do want to turn to the evaluation that we'd like to get everybody's feedback on a session. As Emma mentioned, we're looking to do these sessions going forward, and it's important to get your feedback, and then we'll come back with a wrap up where we'll turn it over to Fatima to wrap us up. So what you see on the screen here is a QR code, and if you can access this QR code using your phone in camera mode, to download the QR code and click on the link and complete the evaluation survey. I promise it's a really short survey, just a couple questions. It's really helpful for us to know what went well and where we need to improve going forward, if anything. So we would really appreciate your feedback. If you can't access the survey link from the QR code on the screen, it's also been provided for you in the chat. If it hasn't yet, it will be there. There you go. It is provided there, so you can access the survey link there in the chat. You click on the link. It'll take you to the very short survey to provide your feedback. And I'm going to stop talking so that you can focus on the questions and provide that feedback to us, and then we'll all come back together. Thank you. If anybody has any technical issues with the survey, please put that in the chat. Thanks. Okay, just a time check. I'll give everybody just one more minute and then we'll come back together and turn it over to Fatima. Thank you also to those that are putting comments in the chat. Okay. I'll turn it back over to Fatima to wrap up the session.
Sounds great. Thank you so very much, Christine. To our presenters. Wow, awesome. You know, as much as I can confess to you, I don't love virtual meetings. I could have stayed in this meeting all day. This was just such great content, information, resources, and just the overall energy, as well as definitely the comments that's coming in from the chat. Some key takeaways. And Russell, this is one that you just said not too like about a few moments ago. Dig deeper. You know, I think with all of these things, we all have to dig deeper ourselves personally, as well as employees, as leaders. There's a shift. What was before is not no longer, but we certainly can be effective in what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we just have to dig deeper, be more reflective. So a comment that you said, Donna, about being the reflective aspect and bringing folks along, intentional. Michelle, you spoke so much about that, and the fact about being inclusive, and really just looking at the different generations. We have work to do. No matter what organization you sit at, no matter where you sit at the organization, it's a new day. It's a new day. It's a hybrid environment. We want to be effective. We want to engage individuals. So for each of us, we must figure out a way to dig deeper. So with that comes a lot with infrastructure and tools. So it's going to be the heart. It's always, we always say the heart and the mind, right? So there's an aspect of this that definitely includes both. With our hearts, like we literally have to think, how are we going to show up? What does this look like? What does this feel like? And then the mind aspect of this, what are the processes and tools that we want to and need to put in place in order to make this all come to reality? And that's some of the things that we can help you with at LinkVisum, the quote unquote, the tools and the techniques and things of that sort. Establishing your infrastructure, your new communication strategies, they're going to be different. They need to. Training. There's not going to be all of the instructor led, right? There's different types of virtual training and micro learnings and things of that sort. How do you do succession planning when you're not literally in the room with folks and seeing how individuals interact and things of that sort in certain leadership meetings and things of that sort? A new infrastructure is needed. A new infrastructure is necessary. And these are some of the things that we're helping our clients with. Would love to help you all. Would like to just continue to engage. But just want to end with thanking each of you, every single person who has registered, participated, and certainly our amazing, phenomenal speakers. And certainly, Christine, you as the moderator. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this time. Let's go forward in this hybrid environment. Let's dig deeper. Let's make this happen. Thank you. And we will open up the lounge if anyone is interested. I believe we can do that. I believe we can, if anyone's interested in hanging out for a little bit. But thank you so very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Dig deeper. Loved it.
Hey man, I send out 3 or especially to our wellness team, I